Kia ora and welcome everybody to this week's Tech Bytes. This one's coming to you on for October. Really keen and excited to talk to Adam Beck, a good friend of ours from over the ditch, living in Brisbane and currently not in lockdown because Queensland's done pretty well, really, haven't you, Adam?
We have. I often say, Craig, that we're dodging bullets every day here in Queensland. We're very lucky.
We've had a few of those, but at the moment we're still in level 3 in Auckland anyway. So Adam is the Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council of Australia and New Zealand. I've been very fortunate to be part of a couple of your conferences that you've held in Sydney over the last couple of years and been participating in those. And smart cities are certainly a topic that we've been quite interested in and really want to make some traction in that. So look, Tech Bytes, bit of a conversation. We've got some questions we want to work through. So Adam, why don't we just start with you introducing yourself a bit about your background and what got you into this current role where you are now?
Yeah, great question. I'm a cities guy, and after 16 years in the private sector with major consulting firms, Arup and GHD, and then I had another 8 years or so in non-profit land with the Green Building Council of Australia, with another non-profit startup think tank in Portland, Oregon in the US. So pretty much there, summarizing my career as an urban planner in development, infrastructure, cities. I kind of came back to Australia after living in the US for 3 years back in 2015, 16, and said, what am I going to do next? And I've always had a very strong passion and alignment with sustainability. And I kind of was somewhat depressed at the state of the climate crisis, still am in many instances. And I was inspired by a friend that I met over in Portland, who's a very deep green sort of ecologist, economist, who was convincing me that data is going to be the superpower for helping solve the climate crisis. And I thought he was mad. But I spent a little bit of time thinking about it whilst I was between jobs. And that's when I stumbled across the Smart Cities Council. They had no intention at all of expanding into the region. They were already in India, Europe, and the US, and they were big markets themselves. But I was sort of at a point in my career that we needed to throw something new at cities to make them more sustainable. And I hadn't played in tech and data, and so I view my current role as Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council for Australia and New Zealand. I just view that as really an extension to my career in cities. So I'm a cities guy, and Smart Cities is a cities agenda. So there we have it.
Cool. Okay. Well, look, let's tease that out a little bit about this concept of a smart city. I mean, it's been popping up all over the place. It's been conferences and discussions, just sort of bubbles along. I mean, when you use the term smart city, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and look, I'll be honest, I wasn't a tech or data guy when I entered this. I was a sustainability guy. I'm an urban planner and social planner by trade. So way down the opposite end. I'm in the analog world, right? I have lived and breathed that forever. So I sort of entered this smart cities agenda and movement kind of not really thinking or focused around the tech and data piece. It was just always about cities being better. And you sort of see things here and there. Yeah, tech and data can kind of help out, right? And then, I'm a bit of a methodical kind of guy, and I like definitions. I'm a strong believer in standards, and, that we rally around common definitions for common good. So I did eventually sort of spend a lot of personal time, over the last couple of years, really trying to boil it down, even though we'd sort of, done that for many years at the Smart Cities Council. But I'm of the firm belief now, and particularly given we've got so many councils across Australia and New Zealand now doing this and have done it and have achieved great outcomes, but have also failed. So if I'm to look at the evidence in court now, it's about using tech and data for good. And
Right.
I kind of try and keep it pretty simple. And we do it at the Smart Cities Council. Formally, our definition, as documented in 2013 in our sort of the first thing we ever did as an organisation was write a book about this. The Smart Cities Readiness Guide says that the smart city is one that uses information and communication technology to advance sustainability, workability, and livability. So that's our definition of a smart city. I like to, and people go, oh, it can't be that simple, right? It's all very risky and costly and expensive, you know. And so I break down that into a shorthand of smart cities about tech and data for good. But for the technical minded that sort of going tech and data for good, I mean, that's just cliche and you're not getting serious for a moment. This is a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. You can't just be, throwing around tech and data for good. We do know that a core function of the smart city is to collect, communicate, and crunch data. And when you pull apart that little framework that we've been using for almost a decade now, sensors, devices to gather information, transmit that information across a network to a place where it can be stored so we can then pick it up and crunch it and analyze it. You then start to break down and see that sort of the component parts, the technology and data component parts. So collect, communicate, and crunch is a core function of the smart city. What is smart cities? It's using tech and data for good.
Cool. I'm going to throw you a curly one then, just about data. So, I mean, we both live in countries which have bicultural, multicultural understandings. I mean, New Zealand definitely, with biculturalism and the partnership with Māori. Data and data ownership is a pretty hot topic across cultures. I mean, we're two older white guys talking about this. What's the Smart Cities Council's sort of approach to data ownership?
I'd probably say, Craig, in all honesty, is we haven't gone there yet, right? We, as you know, we've been in the region here for 5 years, but I tried to do New Zealand from Brisbane for 3 years unsuccessfully. I enjoyed every trip I went over there. I love the place, but it hasn't been until sort of early last year when we sort of brought on Janet McBool as our New Zealand director that we've really been able to, I suppose, give New Zealand the attention it needs and help in the ways that we could with any sort of level of confidence. So the last sort of 12, 18 months has probably been our most active time in New Zealand and very much getting exposed to these kind of issues, which I would say are certainly more top of mind in New Zealand than they are in Australia. And that's another story in terms of our relationship here in Australia with our First Nations people. It sounds to me like it's going to become just foundational once we sort of work this out. And I suppose just talking from the Australian perspective for a moment, not a lot of conversations going on around First Nations people and smart cities or data sovereignty or ownership. I know it's out there. I've been on the edges of some conversations. I've certainly had some of our stakeholders and members who work with First Nations people sort of raise it here and there. So in Australia, I think I'm confident in saying we haven't had the conversation yet, or we haven't been part of it, to be honest. In New Zealand, it's certainly pretty much top of mind from the outset of the marketplace generally, and we need to work out how we're going to support that and contribute and add value to that discussion and dialogue. So I would say still very early days for us as an organisation in the region around data sovereignty, ownership, First Nations, Māori people.
Cool. Hey, look, we were talking just before we started about lockdowns and the different scenarios that places are in. And these lockdowns around the world have, they've led to significant change in the way cities operate. So do you think this is going to have a long-term impact and change the way we think about smart cities?
I hope so. It was a really interesting year last year. 2021's kind of gotten a little bit more normal in terms of whatever that means. But last year was you know, we put tools down for 3 months. Our CEO said, right, stop everything you're doing, tools down for 3 months, and just listen, see what's going on, hear what cities are saying, you know, see what is impacting council. So we learnt a lot last year as an organisation where some key pain points of councils are,
right,
and government more broadly. We saw in the time of most need, total floundering, right? Councils that were able to scrape together a couple of million, 10 million for stimulus and funding and to try and get small businesses flowing again and all that kind of stuff. You know, we saw decisions being made on the fly with zero insight or data. You know, much of it was gut feel. And I think at times that was probably appropriate, right? But I think what that's done is, and even those cities that were well-versed, have good data assets at their fingertips, even then, there's just no time to even look at that and inform our decisions. So I think last year taught us a lot. It shone a light on things like digital divide, digital equity, data literacy and lack of. It taught us that there's just some fundamental data sets, economic data sets, that if you didn't have them, if your council didn't have access to them immediately, you're just at a disadvantage. And spend data is one of those. In Australia, you know, if you're not spending 6 figures on getting MasterCard or other Visa data, you're kind of like flying blind in terms of where in your community spatially, you know, economic activity is sort of flowing or not. So I think on the back of some of those key data gaps, I think it has positioned us with a greater appreciation for data, but also data sharing, particularly at high levels of government.
Yeah.
If you weren't equipped to share data, you kind of really struggled. So longer term, answer the question, I'm hoping that we're going to learn from that. And we've started to see, like, you can jump into budget papers of councils, you can start to see private sector data sets that they're starting to buy that they didn't before, or invest or subscribe. So we're seeing some green shoots there in terms of that coming to fruition.
Hey, yeah, you mentioned doing that, but around you know, highlighted digital equity issues, and so how important is technology and connectivity to developing a smart city? I mean, I know we've had conversations and been in panels around the use of 5G. I mean, it's just a technology after all, but it does then bring, you know, connectivity is obviously quite key.
Oh, I mean, it's you know, the core function of the smart city is to collect, communicate, and crunch. And any one of those 3 pieces of the puzzle, if they weren't there, it kind of all falls over. I mean, you can gather as much data as you want, you can sense, you can deploy IoT, thousands of sensors, you can go for it. But if you can't then get that intelligence, you know, across a network, and the right one, to a place where you can pick it up at your fingertips and sort of gain some insights, you know, the whole system kind of breaks down. Yeah, so connectivity and telecommunications sits there right in the middle. And as you say, it doesn't matter. 5G is just another technology, you know, Wi-Fi, there's, you know, cellular, there's mesh, you know, there's all, you know, as we know, there's all different types of networks. But you don't have that, it kind of falls over, right? We're back to our analog days. And, you know, connectivity is that backbone of the digital economy. And I'd almost say that cloud and storage, edge is sort of becoming, particularly with privacy, you know, I think edge is, and 5G, you know, edge and cloud and storage is being pulled out from the back closet of being those that just the nerds talk about, to sort of, it's really got to come further up front and be front of mind. So yeah, it's I mean, nations, councils, communities will be negligent not to have the best possible connectivity
Yeah.
to allow their stakeholders to participate in the global digital economy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we won't get into conversations about the difference between the two countries, particularly on the NBN versus the UFB project and the rollout of fibre. But hey,
Yeah.
I've got a gig at home, so I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about technology, data, but your background is sustainability, and so I do want to, and quite a bit of our audience will be, Gen Z and millennials, and they'll be thinking about the topics that are really important to them, like sustainability and climate change. So where does that concept fit within smart cities, or is it all about it?
Well, kind of, yeah. I mean, I suppose if I look at it, and I'll be honest, I'll talk from the Smart Cities Council perspective as the organisation. You know, in 2013, in 2012, when we published our very first website, and our website only had two things on it. It was a very lonely old dry desert looking website that had two things: a button that said become a member and a button that said download the readiness guide. That's all we had. We'd done nothing else. We had no stuff, nothing. But the one thing it did say there was the smart city is one that uses information communication technology to advance the sustainability, workability, and livability, right, of our cities and communities and towns. So for us, it's kind of all been about sustainability from day one. And that is by luck that our founder and CEO, Jesse Burst, at the time, was just like a green renewables junkie, right? He was an editor, he was a tech guy, but he was a renewables junkie. You know, Smart Grid was sort of they were the first editorial pieces we ever published, a decade ago. So we kind of, we're sort of closet greenies at the Smart Cities Council, and that's how we just created it. So for us, absolutely, that's what it's about, and that's what it's always been about. And I was only telling someone the other day, you go back to the Rio de Janeiro Command and Control Center, IBM's first poster child smart cities project, 2010. And, you see those images of guys in white lab coats sitting at desks with monitors all on the screen. And it's sort of this big brother utopia, Orwell kind of image.
Yeah.
But when you scratch the surface and you look at what's behind it, it was all about well-being and safety and quality of life in the favelas of Rio. So it's kind of always been about purpose. When I go back and I trace back to some of those places, we do the post-mortem interview with Songdo in South Korea, the Cisco project, right, that everyone thinks failed. When you go back and you do the post-mortems, you kind of find that the intent was always kind of a good one. Yeah, sure, it was big tech companies wanted to sell gear, but they kind of knew that there was a purpose there, right? And, because you don't create stuff that's of no value, no one will buy it. And these are smart organizations. So it was always about a health outcome. It was always about, a better community outcome. I think the focus, the baggage we've got and the legacy we've had is that it was all about the tech and kind of the well-being and the sustainability elements to that got lost. But I'm hoping we're kind of coming full circle again. And I think last year, we've got, the COP meeting coming up. Net zero, my God, net zero is now on newspapers in Australia, right? So, and there's a forced conversation happening. So, and even our government here in Australia, the current climate strategy, they're saying is a technology one. So I'm hoping that we can continue to tighten the relationship between tech and data being a supercharger for sustainability outcomes.
Yeah. Well, you've got some big challenges in Australia. We have big challenges in New Zealand as well. But things, and we've got shared things like coal and all those sort of things, and trying to move away from some of those unsustainable things that are going to impact climate change. Just why did you pick cities? I hadn't thought of this question, but why did you pick cities as something to work on?
Well, I think at the time, going back to 2012, at the time, this was the era of IBM and Cisco going head to head globally. Cisco was smarter communities. IBM was smarter planets, smarter cities. The idea of smart cities was, was kind of around, and we started in the US, and it was a very US focused lens at the time. And you then sort of caught wind of the 100 Smart Cities program starting to evolve in India, and Obama at the time in 2015 was working on a smart cities program. So, and in the US, right, which is very different to here in New Zealand, in the US, the city is where the power is. The city is where all the assets are, right? You got to remember the city in many, 9,500 cities and towns in the US, most cities, municipalities run the school system, the health system, the police department. Most cities own the airport, right? The utility system. So cities was where it was at and is at in the US. Like the federal government really do nothing but sort of dole out money, right? And states and regional level governments kind of float here and there and do some sort of regional wide mobility and transportation. But the municipality, pardon the French, but that's where the shit is done. And that's where the assets are. And that's where I suppose the greatest value can be created.
Yeah. But when we talk about smart cities, particularly across Australia and New Zealand, we're talking the council level. It's just because both countries have significant you might call them non-city councils. They're rural, they're regional, but we're covering all of those, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, 535 local authorities here. You've got 96, 97, 98 there. When you look at both of our land masses, the majority is kind of empty, forested, ag kind of land. But still, most of the population in the urban kind of areas. We've always described the smart cities agenda as one that is scale neutral and geography neutral, right? And I've just gotten off a podcast an hour ago, and we were talking about small cities, and I was talking about the case study of the city of Seat Pleasant in the US. Mayor Eugene Grant, who's the mayor of a city that has a population of 4,700. Doesn't stop them doing smart cities and being a data leader. So, and early days, we were trying to convince people that it's more than just an urban agenda. And back in the day, it was hard to do. But, we've got great rural, with IoT and the creative use of IoT to just gather really important insights about what some would think are sort of boring issues, but fundamentally changing practices, in rural and regional areas. So we're pretty, I think we're happy now that it's both a regional and an urban agenda.
Yeah. Look, if you were looking across Aotearoa and Australia, where are some of the cities that are leading or at forefront and doing some really cool stuff?
I'll preface my response by saying there's a ton of cool stuff happening out there that we got no idea is happening. And we know it's happening, but they're councils that just don't talk about it much or publish stuff. So you immediately go to those that are very much we know about: Wellingtons, Christchurches, Hamiltons, right? They've been around the block a number of times. They got a strategy, they got staff, they got proof of concepts that are either scaled again and again and again, or they're tinkering around. We also like to hang out with those that want to do a lot of sharing as well. Okay, for us, that's an important part of the Smart Cities agenda, which is giving back. I love the cities that are doing stuff, but I don't love them as much as those that are doing really good stuff and then sharing and having authentic conversations with you about what didn't work. So top of mind, Christchurch, Wellington, Hamilton. We've got Marlborough District Council in our Digital Twin Challenge at the moment. And it's equally not only those that have done things, but those that are kind of like primed and ready to go and they want to do it, right? Because half the battle is getting the agency, the approval, the budget, the sign off, and getting the political coverage to try this. So when we talk to Stacey and Brenda at Marlborough, you know, they're just really genuine about it. You know, we don't know where it's going to go, but we're sitting on mountains of data and we know that we can do it better. You know, I just love those stakeholders that are popping up, because you know that they're going to learn from the last 5 years of everyone else doing it, and they'll probably sort of leapfrog. So, you know, so equally some of those big cities and towns that are, you know, very, very well known to all of us in New Zealand and in Australia. You know, we had those early leaders, a lot of them clustered here in southeast Queensland. So Ipswich City Council, Sunshine Coast Regional Council. So southeast Queensland, you know, is a cluster, a region. It's got some unique governance. There's 11, 12 councils that sort of huddle together. So we've had a bit of a hotspot up here, but equally some of those very early leaders like Adelaide. Melbourne's been a continual innovator, but it's spread far and wide now. I mean, we try and keep count, and we kind of lost count at around about 180 councils in Australia, out of 535-ish. So that's been a 5-year journey. So this is certainly not a sprint. Change is hard. So we're seeing that the life cycle of this is it takes about 5 years to kind of get to a point as a council to go, oh, okay, we get it. We know what it can do. Let's now set ourselves up to just do it by default. So that takes about 5 years, we're finding. But hopefully we're going to shrink that down as more and more talk to each other, network with each other, and share as well. That's the other thing that drives me nuts. Restarting again and again and again. You know, a local authority goes off to do a smart city strategy, and they hire a consultant. They start with a blank sheet of paper. I go, no. 175 other local authorities and councils have done exactly what you're about to do. For God's sake, go and steal it with permission and copy and paste it. You know, it's a simple kind of process. Don't tell anyone. It's a simple kind of process. Work out what you want to achieve, and then determine how tech and data can help you. That's kind of it, right? But what happens is, where it's fallen over is people starting with the tech and data and not being clear on their targets of what they want to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about doing something in New Zealand, haven't we? So, you know, a shared event or something that lifts some stuff, but COVID keeps poking its head up and getting in the way,
isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Hey, look, I had a question sent to me from a member when they heard we were talking to you, which was about they're looking at their design templates to ensure they're adding sustainability into their design process. I mean, what sort of questions should we be asking? This is the question from the person. What sort of questions should we be asking ourselves and our suppliers? Can you give a bite-sized answer to that? Was that too long?
From a sustainability perspective, there's some really good standards that are helping us. ISO 37122 are smart cities indicators for sustainability, right? So what people will find is a lot of this work has already been done. Right. You want indicators to embed in procurement contracts, performance specs around sustainability and smart. It's been done. Okay. And you know, we can connect you with those, but it's been done globally through consensus-based processes, and it's called 37122. Or depending on what type of infrastructure, for example, if it's horizontal or vertical, you've got Green Star for buildings in New Zealand. You've also got the infrastructure sustainability rating system for horizontal infrastructure. So when it comes to metrics and standards and weaving that into design, oh my God, it's been done. It's been done to death. And we do it really well in Australia and New Zealand. We do a lot of sharing. I was at the Green Building Council of Australia when we were helping set up the New Zealand Green Building Council. So that is done. Let's get good information to whoever's asking that question. So don't start anything new. Reach out for and grab off the shelf what is relevant and exists, and it does exist.
Yeah. Look, I think this is a fascinating topic, and you're passionate about it, and I could talk to you for ages, but just let's finish up with, you know, if people are keen to get an introduction into this or to learn a little bit more, where do they start?
Oh, well, you know, we like to think that our website is the go-to place for smart cities, right? smartcitiescouncil.com. So we've spent probably half of our 10 years, half of our budget, half of our people allocated to creating resources. And it's all open source and it's all free, right? So you can head to our website. The next best thing, which is harder to find, but it is out there slowly when you trawl through it, is lessons learned and case studies of what other cities have done. And we can't keep up with that on our website because it changes every day. So the first thing I would say is, whether you're public sector or private sector, sit down with a piece of paper and map out your 10 friends that you're going to build in your network when it comes to smart cities. Try and keep it diverse, a couple of councils, some academia. New Zealand is full of smart cities talent. So is Australia. Put 10 names on a paper, build up your network. That's the best way to learn these days, right? We got an awesome website. We got tons of stuff going up there, but this is a daily thing that changes. And the other thing I would say, Craig, is we're still rubbish at sharing how we failed. And you only get that. And sometimes that's the gold, right? You only get that by having the one-on-one conversations with an individual. You're not going to see anyone present that at a conference or write it in an article. So you need that network of friends, 10 names. If you can't come up with 10 names, contact Craig, contact me. We'll get you 10 names, build your network, talk, listen. And we're in a virtual world. There are zero boundaries now, so bring in some people outside the region as well. So head to the website, smartcitiescouncil.com, but at the same time, 10 names on a piece of paper. That's your new Smart Cities network. You've got to build that. You've got to build it now.
Awesome. Hey, look, thank you so much for your time, Adam. It's been a pleasure as always to have a chat, but also to expand on, what this topic is. And again, thanks so much.
Thank you, my friend. It was great.